Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening, and thanks for being patient while we work through a few technical difficulties. As you may all know, we're here tonight to talk about one of the projects within the Connect the Coast initiative. My name is Alan Kindrat. I'm a professional engineer. I live in Smithers, British Columbia. I'm here tonight with my colleague Dipti Vigata, who's a engineer in training, working out of the Vancouver office. And then we've got the Connect the Coast, or some of the Connect the Coast board members here as well, Scott and Tanis. So I will share my screen and give a presentation on the project. I'm going to ask that if you have any questions, you can either put them in the chat or hold them until we're through the presentation, and then we'll leave some time at the end for us to go through your questions. I also have our engineered drawings available, and we'll be pulling them up if anyone has questions specifically related to sections of the design or of the project. So we want this to be as informative as possible and as engaging as possible. So please, if you've got questions, let us know. I will share my screen and get into it. So the presentation tonight is on the Gibsons to Robert Creek connector multi-use path. The project that we've done here is a conceptual design, as well as other important components of the early phases of a project. The Gibsons to Roberts Creek connector is just one small piece of the broader Connect the Coast initiative. And we'll get into how why we're starting with this. So a bit of background first is because the Connect the Coast is a Sunshine Coast-based initiative advocating for all ages and ability cycling and pedestrian infrastructure along the Highway 101 corridor, looking to enhance community connectivity. The initiative was originally started by TRAC, but it's now led by the Connect the Coast Society, which is a registered Canadian charity based on the Sunshine Coast. In 2022, Connect the Coast commissioned a preliminary design study which looked at the Highway 101 corridor from Langdale to Sechelt. This study identified 22 unique segments along this section of Highway 101. Each of those 22 segments received a priority ranking, which was based on projected demand, community support, connectivity and safety, as well as cost and conflicts. The stretch connecting Upper Gibsons to Roberts Creek was identified as the highest priority section of those 22 segments based on the ranking criteria. And that's where this project was born. The preliminary study identified the highest ranking pieces, so Connect the Coast focused on those pieces, and that's where this project came from. Here is the map of the 22 segments that were identified in that preliminary design. You've got Langdale on your right and Sechelt on your left, and the 22 segments in between. The study looked at multiple facility types based on a number of criteria, such as available highway right-of-way, urban or rural context. Some of these facility types included multi-use paths, protected bike lanes, and even shared roads. The section you see in red there is our project, the Upper Gibsons to Robert Creek, segments 5, 6, and 7. For this section of the project, we have designed a full multi-use path from start to finish. Here is another view of our project from Google Earth. You'll see our 3 segments in red, purple, and blue, starting at Pratt Road, which is within the town of Gibsons municipal boundary. The multi-use path travels west on the south side of Highway 101. You'll see the white line there is the town of Gibsons municipal boundary. And so as you approach the end of the first segment, you leave the town of Gibsons and enter the Sunshine Coast Regional District, and continue west into segment 6 and then segment 7, which ends at Lower Road. As mentioned, the multi-use paths on the south side of the highway, and it utilizes the highway right-of-way for the full extent of the project. This section of highway right-of-way is quite constrained. It has a number of challenging areas with multiple drainages, narrow highway right-of-ways, and so it's a pretty difficult place to design and construct a multi-use path. And the conceptual design work that we've done here is helping to prove out the feasibility of the project. So any project will have phases to it. We're currently in the conceptual design phase. The preliminary design, as mentioned, has already been completed.
I'm on a call. I'm listening to a project for biking to try to connect the coast.
So within the conceptual design phase of this project, there are a number of components that we've been completing. The first one there is funding, and so that is the Connect the Coasts work. They have done local fundraising and secured a number of grants to make this phase of the project possible. We've also, as a part of this project, completed an environmental overview assessment to help identify some of the environmental constraints along the right-of-way, as well as to gain an understanding of the potential permits that will be required to move this project forward to construction. An archaeological overview assessment was also completed, which was largely a desktop study followed by some field work by a local archaeological team to help identify areas that are of high potential. So if we know that there are known artifacts in the area or archaeological sites, then we can help design the multi-use path to avoid those areas. Another key component of the conceptual design phase was data collection. And so we conducted surveying with both LiDAR sensors and ground survey crews to get the necessary data to build our design. Stakeholder engagement was another very critical piece of this project. Not only did we want to create a design, determine the costs, but we also wanted to engage with the local governments, with the province, local First Nations, and community groups to help build a social license for the project. And then, of course, we've got the conceptual design. And so with that data, we're able to develop a set of design drawings that are quite advanced for what's considered conceptual, as well as then taking those design drawings to develop a construction cost estimate. Once we are complete the conceptual design phase, which we are getting close to, we will then look to the next phase of the project, which would be detailed design. There are some important things that need to be sorted out before we get into that phase, and the number one thing is determining who is going to own and operate this infrastructure, and how it's going to be permitted. Once those things are sorted out, then we can move forward with the detailed design and hopefully obtain funding for construction and see this multi-use path become a reality. All projects have stakeholders to the project. This project has many stakeholders of varying different levels of interest. The 3 most important or the three stakeholders that have the largest stake in the project would be the Ministry of Transportation and Transit. The multi-use path intends on using the Highway 101 corridor public right-of-way. And so in order for this project to be constructed, the Ministry of Transportation and Transit has to permit that. They also are one of the potential owners of this infrastructure. And then the local governments would be the next most significant stakeholders, both the Sunshine Coast Regional District and the town of Gibsons, because the multi-use path passes through their municipal boundaries. But there are many other stakeholders as well. Both the federal government and the provincial government are stakeholders. Projects like this rely heavily on grant funding, both for planning and design, but also construction. And often those grants come from federal or provincial sources. The District of Sechelt is an important stakeholder as well. While this project doesn't tie directly into their community, the Connect the Coast initiative does bring connected active transportation infrastructure all the way to the District of Sechelt. So seeing this first piece constructed is certainly of interest to the District of Sechelt. The school district, 46, there's a number of schools along Highway 101, and ensuring that kids have safe and accessible routes to get to the schools is really important. And the Squamish Nation as well would be an important stakeholder to this project. But then there are many other stakeholders as well, community groups and nonprofits who all have a stake in seeing or supporting this project. And so as a part of the work that we've done here, we have engaged with as many of these stakeholders as we can to solicit feedback, to incorporate that feedback into our design, and to build support for the project and a social license for it, so that we can find the right owner and the project can move forward to detailed design and construction. Getting into the design a little bit, the first step for us was to conduct our data collection. And so we flew the Highway 101 corridor with drones mounted with LiDAR sensors, as well as had truck mounted LiDAR that was able to collect a very dense point cloud of information, so that we had three-dimensional data for the full corridor to determine where everything was that we could then design the infrastructure off of. But not only that, we also sent ground crews out to collect additional data to fill in the areas where those LiDAR sensors were unable to collect the necessary data. In some cases, this would mean opening up manholes and measuring pipes that are underground, culverts that are hidden in the bushes, or property pins. And so with the combination of both the high definition LiDAR and the ground survey, we were able to have a very strong survey base for us to develop the design off of. And the intent for this was to also have a high enough quality survey that we could actually move right into the detailed design phase with very limited additional survey required, to both warrant cost savings, but also position the project to move right into detailed design when we're ready. So what does the infrastructure look like? What is a multi-use path? Well, it's a shared pathway for both pedestrians and cyclists. The planning study that was done identified this section, that this would be the right facility type. In some of the more urban environments where volumes are much higher, it is typically recommended to separate both pedestrian and cyclist traffic. But in these more rural contexts where your volumes aren't as high and maybe you're a little more constrained with your space, a multi-use path is a great solution. The design of the multi-use path is required to meet the province's BC Supplemented TAC design guidelines, which govern things such as clear zone requirements, which is another way of saying how close the trail can be to the highway. Other design requirements would be ensuring the trail doesn't impede the highway drainage and that it meets the ministry's drainage requirements for design. But then the multi-use path itself is designed to meet the province's active transportation design guidelines, which were developed in 2019. Those design guidelines provide guidelines on how wide the multi-use path should be, how wide the shoulders of the trail should be, what the maximum vertical gradient of the trail is to ensure it's accessible, things like that. So the typical geometry of the trail that we set out to achieve is a 3-meter wide multi-use path with 0.6 meter shoulders or clearance from obstacles. Our design also assumes a pavement structure that is suitable for light utility vehicle use in case maintenance crews need to travel along the multi-use path to maintain the trail or fix areas that have failed. But we can't always achieve that geometry that we set out. And there are a number of areas along the trail where the topography is quite constrained. We've got a number of drainages along this section of the highway, such as Walker Creek and Chester Creek. And for those of you that live on the Sunshine Coast, I'm sure you know these areas and you know that the shoulder of the highway just drops off into the drainage. And so it is a challenging area to try and construct a multi-use path. You're essentially trying to widen the highway in those areas by 4 or 5 meters. And so to do that, you need to utilize retaining walls to try and limit the embankment fill of the multi-use path down into the drainage. For these areas, we've proposed the geometry you see there, and to pull to ensure that we don't have the trail filling way down into the drainage, we utilize physical separation from the highway via concrete roadside barriers. And so this eliminates the clear zone requirements because you are now physically separated from the highway. So that allows us to pull the trail closer to the highway. And so then we've got the CRB, a constrained clearance, the multi-use path, a guardrail, and then a retaining wall. For this project, we've proposed a retaining wall called Flex MSE, which stands for mechanically stabilized earth, which utilizes geogrid tied back beneath the multi-use path. And it's faced with these bags that have a vegetated medium in them so that you can vegetate your wall, kind of like the example you see on the screen there. This example has guard railing and concrete roadside barrier. What it doesn't have is a multi-use path in between, but I think it gives a good sense of what this might look like. So this gives you physical separation from the highway. It helps minimize the environmental impact. It allows the wall to blend in with the natural environment. And because the wall becomes vegetated over time, it's considered a carbon neutral design solution. But what this design solution also creates is improved safety for drivers on the highway. If you drive this section of highway, you know that there aren't barriers separating the shoulder of the highway and those deep ravines. And so by adding the multi-use path to these areas, not only are you creating safe and accessible active transportation infrastructure for people within the community, but you're also making the highway itself safer. Another section where we had to vary from our kind of proposed geometry was along segment 6, which is adjacent to Carmen Road. Here we've got a rather narrow highway right-of-way with a road that runs parallel to Highway 101. And so to sandwich a multi-use path in there, we proposed essentially just having a wide road with concrete curbs with delineator posts on them, separating the multi-use path on the left from the road on the right. This is being commonly used in municipalities throughout the province for creating protected bike lanes, which is the example you see there. You've got the vehicle traffic on your left and a protected bike lane on your right. What we're proposing is essentially this, but with a multi-use path separating the vehicle traffic from the pedestrians and cyclists on the multi-use path. The area here is segment 5 as you approach Pratt Road. This kind of final section of the multi-use path is in a more urban environment as opposed to the rest of the path, which is far more rural. This is a very challenging area for the trail as you are sandwiching the multi-use path between the highway and a number of commercial businesses. And all of these businesses rely on Highway 101 for their access. And right now there are no controlled accesses to these businesses, which mean people can turn off the highway at basically any point into the business. And if you're going to put a multi-use path in between the highway and these businesses, it's very important that you control those accesses or limit where vehicles can actually access the properties, and that makes sure that the users of the trail can predict when they're actually going to cross the path of a vehicle. But this does make it difficult in terms of geometry for the parking lots of those businesses. And so to try and constrain the multi-use path, we have proposed barrier curb along the edge of the highway lane, a 0.6 meter buffer above the barrier curb so that users are still set back from the highway travel lane a little bit, then the multi-use path followed by barrier curb on the outside edge. Here's an example of what that could look like. You'll notice that this render doesn't include the 0.6 meter buffer. It was created before we added that, but nonetheless, it does give you a reasonable sense of what the multi-use path might look like along this final section of the corridor as you approach Pratt Road. This area here is in front of the Ocean View Drive subdivision. This is another challenging area as the highway right-of-way is quite narrow here, and there are a number of properties that back onto the highway. And so what we've proposed is actually reducing the highway shoulder width. And the logic there is, currently people, if they're commuting through this area, have to rely on the highway shoulder. But if you add a multi-use path to the highway, then you don't need to have a 2 meter wide shoulder anymore because people will be on the multi-use path, which is separate from the highway. And that frees up space for the multi-use path between the shoulder of the highway and the properties that are adjacent to the highway. We show a detail here of a small lock block wall beneath the concrete roadside barriers, which allows the trail to be at grade with those properties, and a constrained multi-use path width to avoid costly and prohibitive property acquisitions. Here's an example of what this looks like. Again, similar to the previous example, it doesn't show the lock block detail that was added afterwards, but it does give you a sense of what this could look like at some point in the future. So with the conceptual design nearing completion, we are then able to get into developing the construction cost estimate for each of the segments of this project. On the screen here, you've got an example of our unit-based construction cost estimate for segment 5. This is just the first 3 sections of the segment 5 cost estimate. And what this shows are a number of items that are derived from our conceptual design that have quantities applied to them, which are also taken from our conceptual design, and then unit prices for those quantities, which allow us to determine the total construction cost. And those unit rates are based on historical cost data that we collect over the course of the projects that we work on. And this gives us a fairly high level of confidence in what the cost to construct the project is. You'll notice here that we call this a Class B cost estimate. And so there are a number of kind of levels of cost estimate, Class A being the highest. Class B is certainly on the more detailed end and is appropriate for a detailed conceptual design. And basically what it says with that plus minus 25% is that you know, the design isn't fully completed, and so we add a contingency to what we have estimated, because as this project would move into detailed design, the cost estimate would be updated with more items and more details. And so as we haven't advanced to that stage yet, we apply a contingency of 25%. Here is the total cost estimate for the project, including segments 5, 6, and 7. The first subtotal line there is the cost estimate that was shown on the previous, which is the total sum of all of our items, quantities, and unit rates for each segment. And then we apply a 20% factor to those costs, which cover future planning and engineering work. That future planning and engineering work would include things like project management, stakeholder engagement, indigenous relations, full archaeological impact assessments, environmental assessments, additional legal survey and topo if required, geotechnical investigation and design, hydrotechnical design if we get into designing or modifying any of the creeks or culverts, drainage design for kind of the surface runoff, the transportation and geometric design, so modifications to the highway and the design of the multi-use path itself, and then construction management services, so having engineers involved to administer and inspect the work as it's being constructed. And so, as you can see, there's still a lot of work remaining on the project that is part of the design and construction phases. And so we have to allow for that in our construction cost estimate. And that gives us subtotal 2. But then we apply that contingency that I talked about, which is an allowance for items or things that we haven't quite figured out yet, as this is still a concept design and not a full detailed design. And that gives us our construction cost estimate for segments 5, 6, and 7, totaling just less than $10 million. The total length of the project is 2.4 kilometers, which puts the cost per lineal kilometer at around $4 million. That may seem like it's a lot for a multi-use path, but when you compare to the cost of constructing a new lane of highway, it's really not nearly as expensive. And what we're doing here is we're improving access to active transportation, we're improving community safety, and projects like this do save lives. And so it may seem like a lot of money to some, but an investment like this goes a long way in improving communities. So that is that's basically the conceptual design on a high level. And we are nearing the completion of it at this stage. And then we'll get into moving forward into the detailed design. But as I kind of discussed, there's a few things that need to be sorted out before we can get into that next phase. And that is ultimately who is going to own and operate the infrastructure. So the multi-use path that is in the highway right-of-way, will it be owned by the local governments or will it be owned by the province? That's kind of the next big step to figure out, so that as we move into detailed design, the project can follow the owner's requirements. So path number one would be provincial ownership. And so in 2024, the province announced a new capital program through the Ministry of Transportation and Transit to fund active transportation projects in the highway corridor. The province has announced $135 million in funding for the program, which is intended to be used through their budget cycles of 2023 to 2027. In 2024, when this program was announced, 11 projects were funded through the program. I am fortunate enough to get to work on 2 of those projects. Cycle 16 in Smithers, my hometown, is one of them, and the Highway 35 multi-use path south of Burns Lake is another. So this is a new program. It has set precedents in the province, and it is a real path forward for this project if the province wanted to move in that direction. The second path would be local government ownership. Local governments would own and operate the sections of the trail that fall within their municipal boundaries. Local governments would be responsible for the ownership, maintenance, and capital replacement of the assets. The infrastructure would be permitted by the ministry for use of the province's right-of-way. There are a number of different ways that this can happen. It could be a license of occupation that each of the local governments enter into with the province. It could be amendment of existing maintenance agreements that they may have with the province, or a construct and maintain permit issued by the ministry. There are a number of different avenues in which these local governments can enter into these permits with the province. And it is really kind of between them and the province to determine what the appropriate agreement is. And then the local governments, if they were to be the owners, they would be responsible for funding the construction and maintenance through municipal funds and grants. So those are the 2 paths forward for the project. Often projects like these are difficult for local governments to support because of the cost and also the maintenance burden that projects like this can put on local governments that are constrained with resources and have many competing priorities. And so path 1 is the path that I'm sure local governments are looking at as a possibility, but both paths are possible. The Cycle 16 project was funded by the province through the capital program, but before it was funded, the Bulkley Valley Regional District had agreed to own and operate it, and had actually entered into an agreement with the province to have a license of occupation to operate the Cycle 16 trail on the highway right-of-way. And so they started on path 2 and then ultimately ended on path 1. Where this project goes is unclear at the moment, but those are 2 different routes. So some of the closing thoughts. A project like this is really not possible without a dedicated nonprofit who's working diligently towards making meaningful improvements to the local communities. for those of you that live on the Sunshine Coast, you're extremely lucky to have a group of dedicated individuals like the Connect the Coast, who are committed to making this happen and to seeing these meaningful improvements to the community. For the Cycle 16 project, there was the Cycle 16 Trail Society, and they're the ones that spearheaded the project for nearly 20 years before its success. And so it's interesting that it takes these nonprofits to make important projects like this happen. I hope one day, it doesn't take a board of volunteers to move a project forward, and that the province just takes the initiative to make these important connections. But we're not there yet, and we're super lucky to have nonprofits like Connect the Coast and Cycle 16 moving these projects forward. We've as part of this project, we've developed a highly detailed conceptual design with the Class B construction cost estimate. This has really helped determine the feasibility of the project. It gives local governments and the province a clear understanding of what the costs are, which makes it easier for them to commit to supporting the project. We've conducted robust stakeholder engagement to help build a social license for the project. We traveled to the Sunshine Coast in February, where we met with local government staff, local government elected officials, MLAs and MPs to solicit feedback and to really grow support and raise awareness of the importance of the project. Precedence has been set by the ministry's active transportation capital program and has created a viable path forward for the project if the province supports it. And ultimately, it's going to be up to the key stakeholders to determine which path to follow, whether it be path 1 or path 2. That pretty well wraps it up. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined this evening. This is a super important project that I'm lucky to be a part of, and I am happy to take questions.
We do have some questions in the Q&A tab, Alan, if we want to go through those, and I'd request the presenters also to come off mute and answer any questions they feel can be answered.
So Alan, there was a question in the chat about how much of the 135 million funding pool has already been allocated, and I 5 million.
I think you may have cut out there a bit, Tanis, but I do see that question. I don't know the answer to that. The funding came in 2 rounds. I believe it was 85 and then an additional 50. To my knowledge, only the 11 projects have been announced, and I don't believe that has used the full 135, but I don't know for sure. And how likely are we to be able to access this funding? That's a difficult question to answer. The ministry will look to their local districts to gauge support for these projects, and so we encourage the local governments and First Nations to speak with the local ministry districts and express that this is a priority for them, and that will help go a long way. There's a question about how we can support Connect the Coast. Scott, maybe that's a question for you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I think you've done a really good job pointing to the two paths, and so just reminding local municipal representatives whenever you see them that you're in support of the project is obviously really helpful. We feel that we've come a long way in terms of coming up with a plan, and it's a very viable plan. And they just need to hear that the community really supports this important initiative. So that's a big point. Stephen, did you want to jump in here at all? No, maybe he's not on.
Hello.
Nope.
Sorry, just moving through the house here. Connect the Coast is a registered charity, but the amount of funding that we need is really going to be best served through federal and municipal contributions. So in terms of helping financially, we would welcome donations. Ultimately, we are going to be relying on major granting programs for financial support. That said, people can help by, as Scott mentioned, engaging with our local government and expressing their support for this. And also, reaching out to our MLA, Randy Neal, who is supportive, and to our Member of Parliament, Patrick Weiler, who's also very supportive. But also, I see Mayor Henderson on the call, and it's important that our local leaders are behind this, and they are elected by you, so please do extend your voice to those individuals as well.
Thanks. And thanks, Colleen. I hadn't noticed the Q&A tab. I was just looking at the chat. So looking there now, there's a question about, given the current state of the project, when do you anticipate the earliest construction could commence if funded and ownership issues are sorted out? Yeah, it's a great question. So if we found out tomorrow that the local governments or the province were going to step up and own it and fund it, we would be moving into the detailed design phase, which could take 12 months, 12 to 18 months. There's also a likelihood that there will be some property acquisition required. We have done our best to design the multi-use path within the available right-of-way, but there are areas that are constrained that may require acquisition, which can take another 12 to 18 months. And so we could be looking at 2028 for a construction window if we had an owner and funding in place, but that's very speculative and honestly kind of hard to pin down. Have any contaminated sites that require remediation prior to construction been identified in the project area? No, that would be part of the geotechnical investigation that would come as part of the detailed design phase. And then if areas were identified, a geotechnical engineer would work with the project team to determine what remediation would be required. Is there a vision if and when the multi-use path will be completed all the way to Sechelt? I don't know. That's a very, the project is very ambitious, let's put it that way. And so seeing the path complete from Langdale to Sechelt is going to take, it's going to take a long time. And Connect the Coast is taking on the highest priority segment, and once that piece gets built and people start to see the improvements to safety within the community, then the hope is that that the next pieces become easier, and you have some momentum that can expand and ultimately lead to the complete vision. But how long that will take, really hard to say.
I see Councillor D'Andrade has a question, and then Mayor Henderson.
Thank you. Thanks for this wonderful presentation and for the ongoing work. I know it's huge, and so I'm very thankful. I'm just trying to put in perspective the current situation. The Mayor John Henderson also came up from. We were at UBCM, and the province apparently has no funds. So one of the question is, do we know if these funds have been impacted, right? My other question would be also, is it a decision from council with regard to who owns? And if just, I'm not speaking on behalf of council at this point because I'm just one councillor, but knowing our small tax base and our financial situation with having to repair infrastructure, police costs, and already anticipating every year now our taxes increase close to 10%, whether it's 8 or something like that. So it just seems to me in the short term, ownership by municipality, and also Justin is here from the SRD. She can speak better, but I also understand that the SRD has huge investments now with all the water. They have to, all the water-related issues. So I'm just wondering if it makes. Well, first of all, I'm curious who decides. I mean, is it something that council has to make this decision? But it seems logical to me that the province would be in better shape. And obviously, we can apply for grants. We always do. And but I don't know if this would make us honor just because we got a 1-year grant, right? I mean, it's a lot of responsibility. Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess there's a handful of questions in there. One of the first questions I think was whether or not we know if this 135 million that the province committed to the program has been affected by some of the funding constraints. I personally don't know. To my knowledge, the projects that they've committed to funding under this program are still moving forward. But since that announcement in 2024, no new projects have been announced. Hopefully, we do see future announcements, but the current environment is certainly funding constrained. If the ministry or the province does decide to lead the project, it wouldn't require any local government decisions, really. It's their right of way, and they will develop within it as they see fit. They will treat the local governments as key stakeholders, but to my knowledge, there wouldn't have to be local government votes on whether or not that moves forward because it would be a provincial-led project. If they do not lead the project, then it's a decision that the local governments need to make if they are willing to step in and own and operate it. And it would only be possible for local governments if there was the right type of grant funding in place. The first phase of Cycle 16 was 100% funded through a grant during COVID, and that's what allowed the regional district to get the first piece built. So there's the capital funding to construct, which is a challenge for local governments, but then there's also the obligation to own, operate, and maintain, and so that is often a very large hurdle for local governments as well. And so something that the Cycle 16 Trail Society did was they fundraised and developed a maintenance plan and committed to the regional district that they would fund the maintenance of the project for the first 5 years. And so that actually was very helpful for the local government to make the decision, okay, we'll support this, we'll own and operate it, because we see that the community wants it enough that they're willing to help fund the maintenance for it. I forget what your other questions were. If you want to repeat or have any additional questions that I didn't answer.
No, I think it's great. I was just obviously voicing that it's not my decision, but it's just a landscape that I'm seeing. And of course, this will come to council. And we are very supportive of active transportation. It's just fun, committing to funding. It's the challenging. I know, yeah. But we are not giving up.
Mayor Henderson?
Thank you. Thank you, Alan, for the presentation. I'm an accountant, so I like it when I hear numbers. You were talking about 2.4 kilometers costing about $10 million. And so 4 million per linear kilometer. What's the reference? Because I maybe I missed it, but you referenced it's cheaper than highway cost. I mean, that makes sense, but what is today's going rate for a kilometer of highway?
It's so context specific, but it can be a factor of 10 greater than that.
Okay, thanks. No, that's I thought at one point I thought you said something less than that, so I thought that didn't make sense. The more substantive question, you mentioned this is the segment or the segments with the highest priority. And we've had, I know, Stephen, I think you and I have talked a bit about this, and maybe even Scott, but the decision that this is the highest priority is an interesting one, because it's a lot more room in segments 5, 6, and 7 than elsewhere. And so it really depends, and I don't want to make a speech here, but on how you judge that this is the highest priority. Because I can make a very compelling argument that, it's more important to it'd be safer for people if we could do something even in Davis Bay than it would be on 5, 6, and 7. So can you say maybe a few words just about what are the criteria that factored into making you and the study decide that 5, 6, and 7 are the ones to focus on? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for the question. That's a very fair comment. And I may not be the most well suited to answer it, but the priority rankings were based on projected demand, so how much use the facility would get, how much support came from the community, what it added for connectivity and safety, and then also what the expected costs and number of conflicts were. And so when each segment was ranked based on those criteria, 5 through 7, actually at the time it was including 4, which is the section through Gibsons, were determined to be the highest ranking priority. But there certainly are other areas that are of high priority. One of the other things I believe that made this project be the one that Connect the Coast started with is that it also is more feasible than some other areas. And so picking a phase that had an easier path forward helps build the momentum for the initiative and helps us get one phase of the overall project complete and move on to the next. Maybe someone from Connect the Coast who was more involved in the preliminary design can comment on that question.
Yeah, in our preliminary design report, which is on the TRAC website, there's a whole multiple accounts evaluation that you can go through and see how all of the priorities were assessed. But one of the major factors that we looked at is whether there's any existing alternative to the highway. And so, for example, where Lower Road or Marine Drive parallels the highway, we've deprioritized those sections of highway for development. And so in Davis Bay, there actually are alternatives to the highway. It's once you get past Davis Bay or either side of Davis Bay that you're stuck back on the highway. So the next priority section is more towards the Sechelt end of things.
Yeah, you'll notice I carefully didn't offer up Selma Park
Well, that's the big fish.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think somebody, I'm not sure if the question was related, but or directed to me, but yes, I have walked along the 5, 6, and 7. But Davis Bay, we don't have bicycles walking along the walkway. So anyways, it's a very, very complicated process to get this all the way through Sechelt. And of course, we'll all agree that the only thing that matters is Sechelt. Hitting.
Well, we'll continue going through the questions. How long is the segment being discussed this evening? It's 2.4 kilometers. Have any significant archaeological impacts or species at risk been identified in the project area at this stage of the project? No significant archaeological impacts have been identified. However, a number of areas of high potential have. And so as we move on from the archaeological overview assessment that was completed to the archaeological impact assessment that will be a part of the detailed design, an archaeological team will conduct shovel tests in the areas that have high potential to try and identify any artifacts before we construct through the area. I believe some species at risk were identified in the environmental overview assessment. And as we move forward to detailed design, those areas will be looked at more closely and the environmental impacts of the project will be considered more carefully. How do you accommodate sometimes forested driveway access to properties along the right-of-way? Any existing driveway accesses would be maintained. But one thing that is kind of worth mentioning is there would be some clearing of existing trees along the corridor to make room for the multi-use path. Where there are trees in the right-of-way, they would likely be cleared because the idea here is that we're using the provincial right-of-way for the multi-use path, and in some cases that will conflict with existing trees. We try and avoid tree clearing as much as possible, but at some point you have to kind of pick one or the other, and if you're going to use the available right-of-way, then you may need to do some tree clearing.
Alan, I know that time as we had it scheduled is up. You're welcome to continue answering questions if you like, but you are also welcome to call it a night.
No, I'm happy to stay on and continue answering questions, as long as people have questions to ask. Going back to the chat, I see Mike has a question. Given a final decision on funding and responsibility via path 1, 2, what would be the estimated time to complete the project? I think I kind of answered this a little bit. If a final decision on funding and responsibility was made today, we could be looking at constructing 2 to 3 years from now, but that's very speculative. Detailed design, property acquisition, and then tendering for construction could likely take a few years.
Alan, I'd like to just address one comment too. One of the comments was from somebody who's looking forward to this, but they realize that it's very unlikely, quote, that I'll ever be able to regularly independently travel the coast. This project has to start somewhere at some time with someone. And, you know, we may not all enjoy the full benefits of this, but one day people will. And so we have to be visionary in terms of our approach. This isn't something that's going to happen tomorrow. It's going to happen in a staged manner, but we have to keep it moving forward if we want to achieve this. So It'd be great if we could have it tomorrow, but we have to be patient and just keep pushing forward with it.
Thanks, Stephen. I think the one thing that we can hopefully get some optimism from is that that active transportation is being recognized more now than it was 20 years ago. So we are in a time where we have momentum around projects like this. There are currently funding constraints within the provincial government, but both the federal government and the provincial government value active transportation. And just last year, the province announced a very important program, the capital program, which is very unique to all the provinces in Canada. And so we're lucky to live in the province that creates a program like that, and we need to advocate for its continuation. Have you ever walked or cycled this stretch? I have. I came down in February and walked it. It was very eye-opening. I had Google Street viewed it probably 50 times before coming, and it's very constrained. And if you have to rely on the highway shoulder to walk or bike to where you're going, I empathize for you, because that is a very scary and dangerous section of highway. And I know that there have been recent fatalities along this section of highway, and I strongly believe that a project like this will save lives and is certainly worth communities supporting and funding. Excuse me.
Alan, I think if there are no further questions, we should wrap it up. We have one more, sorry, from Councillor D'Andrade. You're muted.
So I was just thinking, what's next? Are you approaching council shortly? Are we applying for more funds? But I remember last time we just supported and you guys applied for the funds. So I'm just trying to remember and also trying to understand what's next in terms of this. I know we have to decide who owns this, but are you coming to council to ask the question?
Dennis?
Yes, we will be coming to council. We have our initial ask is to the province, and if that is unsuccessful, we'll be coming to the local governments and asking to arrange a memorandum of understanding where we lay out our various responsibilities in the project. And Connect the Coast Society anticipates taking the lead on fundraising. But as you know, for many grant opportunities, it requires municipal partner or municipal support.
Okay, so just to better understand, the fact that Connect the Coast already applied for the province, so if the province says yes, so the ownership is decided already?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so that's great. I hope they do. And then the problems are solved.
We all hope that.
And writing grants, even our staff are busy, but I know we can make it. That's not the problem. Support, and even in-kind contributions. But yeah, okay, fingers crossed. And with regards to the federal funding, can you remind me, is this something that has been asked already, or?
Well, the majority of the funding for the work that has been done came from the federal government. It was through the Green Municipal Fund.
Okay, but there's anything in the horizon that we are waiting to apply, or not at this point with the feds?
Yeah, we're not aware of any opportunities right now, but grant opportunities do come up periodically, and they often are on very short timelines for application. So we just try to stay aware of what the potential opportunities are and to take advantage of them when we can.
Okay. And do you have any window expectation when you're hearing from the province?
Well, the capital program, it's a bit obscure how it works. It's not a public process, so I don't think there will be any kind of announcement. It's a process that's internal to the ministry. And so we speculate that there will be an intake this fall, but as you may know, the civil service is on strike, and active transportation grants have been paused pending the outcome of the Clean BC review. And so we don't really know whether there will be an intake this fall or not.
Okay. Okay, thanks for the picture. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah.
There are a few more questions in the Q&A that I'm happy to answer. It's my understanding that separated paths are cheaper to construct because the base doesn't have to be built strong enough to support cars. Is this path built just to support bikes and peds, or does it have to be strong enough to support cars? It's a great question. The costs that we've allowed for, and our cost estimate is for a pavement structure that is suitable to support small utility vehicles. And the reason for that is whether it's the province or local government that is maintaining the trail, there are going to be instances where they do have to drive on the trail. There are also utility poles in the right of way, and so sometimes utility companies need to drive on the infrastructure to access their poles or maintain them. And so it is important that the trail is constructed so that it will support the loads of those types of vehicles. Are additional crosswalks anticipated to help users move from north to south on the highway? Yeah, that's a great question as well. Actually, looking at crosswalk locations was not part of the scope of the conceptual design for this project, but as we developed the design, the province did commit to adding 2 crosswalks. One which was just recently added. I'm forgetting the name of the park, Tanis.
The Poplars. One has been added at the Poplars. I think it's active now, and there's one anticipated at Ocean View Drive that will be implemented this fall.
I actually stopped at it tonight on my way home for 2 cyclists who needed to cross. It was very touching.
Has Selma Park actually been surveyed? So as part of this project, Connect the Coast also had the survey consultant collect LiDAR data for additional segments so that they could move forward with conceptual designs for those other segments at a later date. Tanis, I don't recall if that included Selma Park or not.
Yes, the data we collected did include Selma Park, but that data has not yet been processed. There's extra things that Alan's probably better at this part than I am, that has to be done to the data to make it legible, like what you saw in the slide during the presentation. And that has not been done because that's another expensive process.
Yeah, so a big part of the cost of collecting LiDAR is really getting the crew out to site and getting the drone in the air. And then the incremental cost of collecting that LiDAR data for a wider swath of area is really not that high. And so that's why Connect the Coast went ahead and collected additional LiDAR for these other segments, but that data hasn't been processed. But they have it and they can use it when they're ready to move forward on those additional projects. Just for reference, given the similarities between Cycle 16 and Connect the Coast, how much did the province grant towards Cycle 16? The province, when they took over Cycle 16 through the capital program, announced a $10 million fund to see the remaining phases of cycle 16 through to construction. And so that is phase 2, 3, and 4 of the cycle 16 trail. Phase 3 is under construction right now, and 2 and 4 are slated for construction in 2027. Given the current state of the project, when do you anticipate? Oh, I think we may have got that one already. Are there any new ones? I think that may be all the questions. If anyone has any more, feel free.
Sorry, I'm the crosswalk guy. But I didn't really, the answer, like, are you advocating crosswalks as part of the trail at certain points, or no? I didn't really get a clear picture of that, because that will affect my ability to use the trail if there's not a crosswalk. Thank you.
So the reason for starting the project at Pratt is because that's where the last traffic light in Gibsons is located, allowing people to cross there. And then there's 2 additional crosswalks in the 2.4 kilometer section to Lower Road.
But if the question was about the addition of crosswalks along the route, you know, we're trying to keep the path on one side of the highway so that people don't have to cross frequently. However, there are places where people will need to cross, and in some cases, it's possible that you may have to travel some distance along the highway on the multi-use path or opposite it in order to be able to cross safely. For example, if you look at the intersection of Jack Road and the highway, Jack Road and the highway, at the bottom of the passing lane, cars are traveling 80 kilometers an hour or more along there, and without the speed limit being lowered, it would be impossible to put a crossing in there. Plus, I think the ministry would suggest that there's not enough volume there. However, you know, we've heard from the Girl Guide camp that they would love to see a crossing there, because at some point they take dozens of kids across the highway and they've had to have the RCMP slow traffic. So while we would like to be able to address all of these crossings or crossings that could be there, that's largely the discretion of the ministry and their what they determine the speed limit should be in a particular area. So yes, we'd like to see more crossings. No, we don't want to overly disrupt traffic, but we do have to work with the ministry and within their guidelines to do that. Thank you, Alan. Does anyone have any more questions? Or I think we'll wrap it up. We're approaching an hour and a half, and that's probably appropriate for a Netflix special. So, Alan, do you have any words to wrap it up?
Not really. I appreciate everyone that took the time to tune in tonight. You know, I get to do this for a living. I feel very fortunate that my job is to design and advocate for these types of projects. I've seen the value that they can add to a community here in Smithers, and I really hope that in a few years we're in a place where we've got a committed owner to this project, and we're setting our sights on construction. And so it's going to take everybody to advocate on the local government level and on the provincial level to make it happen. And I hope that it does.
Thanks, Alan. We'll wrap it up there. I do want to say, if you're still on the call, please join us at TRAC's annual general meeting at the Gumboot Cafe on November 25th, 7 p.m. Free pizza, and you'll get a good overview of what TRAC has been up to this year beyond our involvement with Connect the Coast. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
There is one more thing that I forgot about, so I'm going to jump in there just for a moment, and that is that we have a questionnaire, which is part of our stakeholder engagement. it's kind of the final piece. So we now have a design that's complete and will be posted on TRAC or Connect the Coast's website, along with a cost estimate and a questionnaire that will be distributed. And we encourage people to spread it around and try and get as many people to answer it as possible. It's ultimately another data point that we can point to show support for the project and help convince the province and local governments. Dipty's added it in the chat there if you want to grab the link. And you can also find it, I believe, on Connect the Coast's website. So we'll leave it there for now, and hope you all have a great evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.